The galaxy had long dismissed humanity as background noise, an unremarkable species clinging to a modest cradle world and scattering fragile colonies into the margins of explored space. The empires that dominated the stars, vast, ancient, and burdened by their own pride, spoke of humans with indulgent amusement, as though they were children who had wandered into a room meant for their betters. To them, Earth was a place of quaint curiosities, art that seemed fevered, music too turbulent, and diplomacy too forward. Few bothered to imagine that such a people might one day matter. Ambassador Elias Rourke had learned to swallow his irritation at these perceptions. In the vaulted chamber of the Concord of Powers, he sat rigid, the only human at a table carved for giants. His shoulders remained square, though every glance from the alien dignitaries radiated dismissal. The pale, crystalline envoy of the Phyrexian Confederacy had just concluded another thinly veiled insult, calling humanity's frontier colonies temporary habitats for a race still testing its lungs beyond the womb. Polite laughter rippled through the gathering. Rourke forced a smile, noting silently how many of those laughing factions had already failed to tame the very planets where human miners thrived. Yet even as he defended his people's right to be heard, news weighed heavily on his thoughts. Reports had arrived only days earlier, encrypted, urgent, undeniable, of attacks on the outer human colonies. Not raids, not the occasional pirate strike, but systematic assaults that bore the unmistakable design of a rising power. The Zoroth Dominion, a warrior empire long confined to the galactic fringe, was pressing inward. Their fleets had already crushed 3 independent systems and now advanced along the frontier where human settlements were most exposed. Rourke's colleagues on Earth had begged the Concord to act. Our colonies will not withstand this alone, one message had pleaded. Yet the Concord's response had been silence, broken only by the occasional reminder that humans were not formal members of any military alliance. As he gazed across the chamber, Rourke understood why. No one here expected humans to endure. Back on Earth, Commander Maya Serrano had no patience for the condescension of alien councils. From the bridge of the Resolute, she watched grainy sensor images of burning skies over Kestrel 9, a colony stripped bare by Zoroth firebombing. Serrano's jaw tightened as she listened to the fractured transmissions from survivors, their voices breaking with static and terror. She had fought pirates before, smugglers too, but this was organized annihilation. Her crew mirrored her silence. Young men and women, many serving their first tours, stared at the unfolding destruction with wide eyes. They had grown up hearing that humanity's destiny was to integrate peacefully into the greater galactic community, to adapt rather than resist. Now those words rang hollow against the screams echoing through the comms. Serrano's voice cut through the tension, calm but fierce. Record everything. Let history know who struck first, and how we answered. On the colony itself, among the ash and rubble, Engineer Kai Danner dragged a wounded comrade to the ruins of the hydroponics dome. Smoke clung to every breath, and the air reeked of scorched soil. Danner had once dreamed of designing habitats for peaceful expansion, not fortresses for survival, but necessity had no regard for dreams. Around him, survivors gathered what weapons they could, mining lasers, repurposed drills, scavenged rifles, anything to remind themselves they were not yet broken. He looked at the sky, where alien fire had painted a grim dawn, and whispered a vow that echoed far beyond his shattered home. We endure. Word of the massacre spread quickly. Alien broadcasters treated it as inevitable, a small tragedy on the periphery of their vast affairs. Commentators spoke of human bravery with the same tone used for an animal defending its den, commendable but futile. In taverns and forums across the galaxy, the consensus was simple. The humans would collapse, assimilated, or erased, leaving little more than a footnote. But within humanity, a different fire caught. On Earth, families watched the news with clenched fists. In orbiting shipyards, welders and engineers worked double shifts without being asked. Conscripts lined up outside recruitment centers, faces grim and unflinching. Old veterans whispered stories of battles fought in silence, victories unrecorded by alien historians, reminding anyone who listened that humanity had never been strangers to war. Ambassador Rourke felt the shift even in his bones. During the Concord's next session, as a Phrexan delegate dismissed the plight of your fragile frontier people. Rourke's response cut sharper than he had intended. Fragile? You mistake patience for weakness. You mistake our silence for absence. We will not beg for survival. We will fight for it, with or without you. The chamber had grown quiet, and for the first time in years, alien eyes regarded him not with indulgence, but with something colder, calculation. In orbit around Mars, Commander Serrano met with her senior officers. Maps and projections sprawled across the holodeble, painting humanity's disadvantage in stark detail. Every analysis ended the same way. Without allies, Earth's colonies would fall one by one until core itself lay exposed. Serrano tapped the display. Her voice steady though her chest burned with suppressed fury. They think we are weak. They think we will scatter. We will show them what it means to corner humanity. The officers nodded, and though their eyes betrayed fear, none spoke of retreat. They knew the odds, but they also knew their own history. War survived, disasters endured, generations clawing life from hostile worlds. Humanity had always lived with the impossible. This war would be no different. Far across the void, the Zoroark commanders dismissed their enemy with the same arrogance the Concord had shown. Reports described humans fighting stubbornly, but the Dominion strategists smirked at the thought. Stubbornness was not strength. They believed, merely the last twitch of prey before the inevitable strike. They did not yet understand that for humanity, stubbornness was survival itself. As the first human fleets prepared to mobilize, as survivors rebuilt shattered colonies with hands that trembled yet never stopped, a quiet certainty began to spread across Earth and its scattered children. They would not vanish. They would not surrender. The galaxy might see them as fragile, insignificant, or expendable, but the galaxy was about to learn how wrong it had been. And in the silence before the first great clash, Serrano looked out at the stars, her voice barely more than a whisper, but heavy with promise. They wanted a war. Now they'll learn who we are. That's Section 1, 1,000 words. Focused, character-driven, setting up the central conflict and ending with a satisfying but urgent hook into the coming war. Would you like me to carry the same tight narrative style into Section 2, or do you prefer a slightly broader, cinematic perspective for the large-scale war sequences? The first ripple of defiance came not from Earth, but from the colonies strung along the asteroid belt. Miners at Ceres, unwilling to dismantle the reactors that powered their settlements, ignored the Coalition's decree. When the aliens arrived with patrol to enforce compliance, they found themselves met not with surrender, but with silence. Every channel blocked, every docking bay sealed. Hours later, the human fleet at Mars surged forward to shield the colonists, forcing the Coalition ships into a retreat that was more tactical than defeated. The message was unmistakable. Humanity would not bow so easily. Captain Elias Varick watched the events unfold from Horizon's wake, the tension in his jaw visible even in the dim light of the command deck. What should have been diplomacy had curdled into confrontation, and he could feel the threads of inevitability tightening. The Coalition called the series defiance and act of aggression. Earth called it survival. In the middle stood Elias, a man chosen to bridge worlds, now watching the chasm widen with every passing day. Sarah Malik had become his closest confidant. Her analytical mind a counterbalance to his instinctive defiance. She spent hours combing through intercepted transmissions, her sharp eyes unraveling the Coalition's carefully woven words. What she discovered chilled them both. The Coalition did not fear humanity's current power. It feared what humanity represented. Entire debates among alien leaders centered not on conquest, but on the risk of allowing an unpredictable species to continue evolving unchecked. Elias understood then that no concession would satisfy them. Humanity was not being judged for what it had done, but for what it might someday do. The Coalition tightened its grip. Patrols lingered at the edges of human territory, monitoring, interfering, shadowing every ship that strayed beyond approved routes. Research programs were dismantled under threat, though others were hidden deep within asteroid mines or beneath the oceans of Europa, carried on by scientists unwilling to let discovery die. Resentment grew like a slow-burning fuse. For every colony forced to comply, another bristled at the intrusion. Whispers of rebellion spread to the network of settlers, and soon those whispers became open defiance. The spark came at the mining outpost of Esta. A human freighter, accused of trespassing into restricted space, was surrounded by coalition frigates. Communications were cut short, and moments later, the freighter erupted in flames. Whether it was a misfire, panic, or deliberate execution remained uncertain, but the effect was absolute. Images of the burning ship raced across every colony feed, igniting outrage that no council could quell. For the first time in history, humanity's divided government spoke with one voice. They would resist. Elias felt the shift immediately. Orders reached Horizon's wake, no longer to negotiate, but to prepare. Human fleets mobilized, hastily armed stations fortified themselves, and every captain knew the odds they faced. The Coalition's fleets outnumbered them 100-fold, its technology centuries ahead. Yet Elias saw something in the crews around him, a fierce determination that no weapon could measure. Humanity had survived every trial not by strength, but by its refusal to accept inevitability. The first skirmishes tested that resolve. At Callisto, a small squadron of human corvettes faced a coalition cruiser 3 times their size. The aliens deployed with flawless formation, their weapons precise and overwhelming. But the corvettes did not fight as expected. They scattered, weaving through Jupiter's radiation belts, using the very hazards of the system as weapons. They lost 2 ships, but the cruiser limped away battered, its predictive algorithms confounded by human improvisation. Across the colonies, the story spread like fire. Humans could fight, and they could win, but every victory carried a price. Families wept for those lost at Callisto, at Vesta, at Mars' orbit. Supplies strained under the demands of war. Elias carried the weight of every casualty like a stone in his chest. Yet he also understood that retreat meant extinction. The Coalition would not accept coexistence. It demanded obedience. And obedience, he believed, was a death slower but no less final. In stolen moments of quiet, Elias confided in Sarah. He admitted that what frightened him was not death, but the possibility of humanity losing itself, becoming so desperate for survival that it surrendered the very spirit that made a human. She answered him with a steady conviction. They don't understand us because they can't. They've forgotten what it means to risk everything. That's why they fear us. And that's why we'll endure. The Coalition responded to resistance with escalation. A blockade was declared, hemming in Earth and its colonies, choking trade routes and supplies. Entire fleets encircled human space, their silent presence an unspoken ultimatum. Elias knew the Coalition was preparing for a decisive strike. The patrols grew bolder, the threats sharper, and every day the noose tightened. It was then that Elias made a choice. He gathered his officers and laid out a plan. Not to win, for victory against such odds seemed impossible, but to survive long enough to force recognition. If humanity could resist, adapt, and endure in the face of overwhelming power, the Coalition would have to reconsider its verdict. They would prove through action what no argument could convey, that humanity's unpredictability was not recklessness, but resilience. As the council chambers buzzed with frantic strategy and colonies braced for war, Elias stood once more at the observation deck, the stars cold and bright before him. The alien fleets massed beyond the edge of sight. Their presence felt like a gathering storm. He could almost sense their certainty, the way they believed the weight of centuries would crush this upstart species into compliance. He clenched his fists, not in anger but in resolve. Humanity had always been underestimated. Once, it was a wilderness that threatened to erase them. Then it was famine, war, disease, even the vast silence of space itself. Each trial had forged them harder, sharper, more unwilling to break. Now, the test was greater than any before, but Elias believed the outcome would be the same. The Coalition prepared for its decisive strike, confident in inevitability. Humanity prepared as well, not with certainty, but with defiance. And as Elias gazed into the abyss of stars, he understood that the moment of reckoning was no longer distant. It was racing toward them, a storm they would either weather or be swept away by. The war was no longer looming. It had arrived. The Coalition's armada emerged from the dark like a tide of steel and silence, blotting out the stars as it advanced upon the scattered line of human defenses. Ships older than humanity's recorded history bore down on hastily armed frigates and converted mining vessels. On paper, the battle was already lost. Yet as Elias Varick stood at the center of Horizons Wake's command deck, he felt not despair, but a cold clarity. History would remember what happened here, whether humanity endured or perished. Orders rippled through the fleet. Human ships scattered instead of holding formation, diving into asteroid fields, looping around planetary rings, vanishing behind electromagnetic storms. To the Coalition, trained to fight with precision and predictability, it seemed like chaos. To Elias, it was purpose. Every maneuver a test of creativity, every retreat a feint, every loss a calculation. Sarah Malik monitored the swarm of enemy signals, her fingers dancing across controls as she whispered updates. She had cracked fragments of the Coalition's targeting algorithms, exposing how their ships relied on prediction to anticipate enemy moves. Against other civilizations, it had been flawless. Against humans, who thrived on improvisation, it faltered. "They can't keep up," she murmured, eyes wide. "We don't make sense to them." Even so, the price was terrible. Entire squadrons vanished under the Coalition's relentless fire, their sacrifice buying only moments for the rest. The colonies broadcast frantic calls for aid, each one a knife to Elias's heart. He forced himself to remain steady, to give voice to the resolve his people needed. "We fight not because we can win," he told his officers, "but because surrender would mean losing ourselves. If we endure, we prove them wrong." The battle reached its crescendo at Europa. The Coalition brought its heaviest warship, a fortress the size of a continent, bristling with weapons designed to silence rebellion in a single strike. Human fleets converged, battered and broken, yet unwilling to retreat. Elias ordered Horizons Wake into the heart of the assault, weaving between blasts of energy that carved the void into searing light. It was then that Sarah proposed the unthinkable. The reactor cores of the colonies could be weaponized, their containment fields released to unleash devastation on a scale that even the Coalition would feel. It was reckless, dangerous, and likely suicidal, but it was also the only chance to fracture the enemy's certainty. Elias hesitated only a moment before sending the command. Across the system, colonies prepared to sacrifice everything. The explosions came not as singular blasts, but as a cascade of fire and fury, each detonation turning asteroids and abandoned stations into weapons. Coalition vessels staggered under the unexpected assault, their perfect formations breaking apart in confusion. For the first time, the Armada wavered. Human ships, scarred but unbroken, surged forward through the chaos. They did not destroy the Coalition fleet, but they shattered its aura of inevitability. Elias watched as the colossal warship reeled, its hull cracked, its weapons sputtering. The Coalition could still annihilate humanity with time, but they no longer faced a foe to be dismissed. They faced survivors who refused to die, and in that refusal lay a power the Coalition had not accounted for. When the guns fell silent, it was not because humanity had claimed victory, but because the Coalition hesitated. Among their ranks, voices rose in dissent. Some demanded extermination, others urged caution, but a growing number spoke of something dangerous to their order: respect. Humanity had done what no other young species had managed. They had forced the Coalition to doubt. Negotiations began not with triumph, but with exhaustion. Delegates met once more, the Soriety faces unreadable behind their shifting masks. Elias stood before them, bloody but unbowed. "You feared what we might become," he said, his voice carrying across the chamber. "But what you saw in battle is what we already are. We do not endure because we are strong. We endure because we refuse to break. If you wish to destroy us, you may try. But know this, even if you scatter us to the stars, humanity will rise again." The silence that followed was heavier than any weapon. The Coalition could still crush them, yes, but in doing so, they would reveal their own fear to the galaxy. To annihilate humanity now would not be order. It would be tyranny, and tyranny was a contagion they had long sought to suppress. The terms that followed were not victory, but recognition. Humanity would not be dismantled or disarmed. Colonies would remain, though closely watched. The Coalition would grant them space, not out of generosity, but out of wary respect. The council chambers empty with the uneasy knowledge that peace had been forged not through submission, but through defiance. That night, Elias stood once more at the observation deck. Sarah at his side. The stars stretched infinite before them, no longer silent, no longer empty. "We survived," she whispered, though her voice carried no triumph. It was all laced with fatigue. Elias nodded, his gaze steady. Survival was never the end. It's the beginning. They've seen what we are. Now we have to decide what we'll become. Beyond the glass, the alien fleets drifted away, diminished but not gone. Humanity had won not freedom, but chance, a sliver of space carved into a universe that had tried to cage it. It was fragile, perilous, and uncertain, but it was theirs. And in the cold silence of the void, where countless civilizations had risen and fallen, a new story began. Humanity's story, written not by submission, but by fire, defiance, and the refusal to bow. The uneasy peace that followed the armistice felt brittle, like glass stretched thin across a storm. Humanity had survived the crucible, but survival was not the same as security. Coalition fleets still patrolled the edges of human space, their presence a constant reminder that sovereignty had been granted, not earned outright. For many, the war's end was no ending at all, only a pause before the next reckoning. Captain Elias Varick carried the weight of that knowledge with every breath. Though hailed as one of the figures who had guided humanity through the storm, he felt no triumph. Every victory had been written in blood, every concession purchased with sacrifice. The faces of those who had not lived to see this fragile peace haunted him, pressing against his conscience whenever the cheering crowds grew too loud. Yet even in his private moments of doubt, he knew there was no turning back. Humanity had forced itself into galactic stage, and retreat was no longer possible. Sarah Malik, ever his sharp-eyed counterpart, found little comfort in the Coalition's concessions. She had taken to poring over intercepted communications once more, her instincts warning her that the Coalition's restraint was not born of trust, but of calculation. Reports hinted at division among their member species, fractures born from humanity's defiance. Some admired humans, seeing them a spark long lost in their own stagnant societies. Others seethed at the insult, calling for a final demonstration of overwhelming force. "They're watching us," she told Elias in a hushed voice one night aboard Horizon's wake. "Not as allies, not as equals, but as an experiment. If we stumble, they'll be waiting." The truth of her words emerged soon after. A Coalition envoy arrived at Earth with terms framed as cooperation, but edged with dominance. Humanity would be allowed to expand again, but only under supervision. Technology deemed destabilizing remained forbidden. Colonies beyond Mars would be monitored by Coalition observers. To the Council on Earth, weary of bloodshed, it seemed a tolerable compromise. To the colonies that had borne the brunt of the war, it was an insult wrapped in diplomacy. Protests flared on Titan and Europa, spreading like wildfire across the belt. Miners, engineers, and farmers who had watched their homes burn would not accept guardians who had nearly destroyed them. Elias traveled to Titan at the Council's request. His presence meant to calm tempers. Instead, he found himself listening more than speaking. The settlers' voices were raw with fury and loss. "We fought for our freedom," one woman spat, her hands still calloused from work in the methane rigs. "Now, they tell us we're free only so long as we behave like children? If Earth bows, we won't." Her words echoed the storm in Elias's own heart. He knew that humanity could not afford another war, not yet. But he also knew that unity born of fear could not last. If humanity fractured between cautious submission and reckless defiance, the Coalition would not need to destroy them. They would collapse from within. It was Sarah who saw the path forward, though it carried as much danger as promise. "They fear what we might become," she said. "So let's become it, but on our terms. Not through war this time, but through showing them what they can't ignore. Innovation, discovery, proof that we don't just survive, we advance." Together they rallied a network of hidden scientists, engineers, and thinkers who had refused to abandon their work during the blockade. Research labs thrived again in secret corners of the system, shielded from Coalition eyes. Advances came swiftly. Propulsion systems tested in the void beyond Neptune, adaptive AI built to learn as unpredictably as humans themselves, genetic therapies that turned fragile colonies into thriving outposts. Each breakthrough was a declaration, unspoken yet undeniable. Humanity would not stagnate. But secrecy was never perfect. Whispers of these developments reached coalition ears, and soon emissaries demanded inspections. Elias and Sarah found themselves once more in tense chambers, the weight of entire worlds pressing on their shoulders. The Soriathi spoke with their familiar blend of courtesy and threat, warning of the consequences should humanity stray again into perilous ambition. Elias met their veiled menace with quiet defiance. "You call it peril," he said. "We call it life." The standoff teetered on the edge of collapse. Coalition fleets edged closer to the colonies, and human warships shadowed them with wary readiness. Both sides hesitated, unwilling to ignite another inferno, but unable to back down. In that fragile moment, it became clear to Elias that the war had never truly ended. The battlefield had simply shifted, from weapons to will, from survival to identity. One evening, aboard Horizon's wake, Elias and Sarah stood together in silence. Beyond the glass stretched the infinite canvas of stars, each one a promise of unknown worlds. "We can't keep fighting like this," Elias murmured. "Every battle costs us too much." Sarah's gaze did not waver. "Then we stop fighting their way. Not with fleets, not with blockades, with what they don't understand. Our refusal to accept limits. That's our strength. Not defiance for its own sake, but the hunger to keep moving forward, no matter who tells us to stop." Her words settled into Elias like a lodestar. For the first time since the war began, he felt not only resistance, but direction. Humanity did not need to win every battle. It needed to outlast, outthink, and outgrow the constraints placed upon it. The coalition could monitor, threaten, even wound them, but it could not extinguish the fire that drove them onward. When the next dawn rose over Earth, Elias addressed the council with a steadiness born of conviction. "We cannot live in the shadow of fear," he told them. "Not of annihilation, not of control. If we are to survive, it will not be as tenants in someone else's galaxy. It will be as ourselves, flawed, daring, relentless. They fear what we might become. Let us give them reason to." The chamber erupted with debate, but Elias no longer felt the same weight pressing him down. Humanity's path was uncertain, perilous, and fraught with enemies both within and without. Yet it was theirs to walk. And as long as stars burned in the void, no force could deny them that. In the silence after the council adjourned, Elias stood with Sarah once more at the observation deck. The coalition's ships glittered like distant sentinels, watching, waiting. But beyond them lay the uncharted dark, filled with worlds untouched and mysteries unsolved. Elias's lips curved into a faint, weary smile. "Let them watch," he said softly. "We're not done yet." The galaxy, vast and ancient, had tried to cage humanity. Instead, it had awakened them, and in that awakening lay a truth no coalition could unmake. This was only the beginning.